Welcome back to the Alec Lewis Show. I am your host, Alec Lewis. This is episode 80. We made it to 80, recording on Thursday, May 1st. How about those Wolves? Holy cow, was that a performance last night? And had they not shot 4 for 90 from 3, they probably would have beaten the Lakers by 30. Anyway, looking forward to the next round as well as watching Boldy on Thursday night if you're listening to this on Thursday. Got a guest for you today. He's a returner. His name is Fran Duffy. He works for the All City Network, evaluates prospects, watches a lot of film, and had a phenomenal draft guide that was interactive with tons of nuggets on pretty much, 250 plus players probably in the draft. But we talked about the Vikings picks, got into the UDFA stuff, talked about an interesting name that may be at minicamp, Tommi Hill, cornerback from Nebraska. So always great to catch up with Fran. I respect the heck out of the job he does. And he comes at things from the lens of being in the Philadelphia market. So to kind of evaluate, a specific team from the lens of the team that just won the Super Bowl is always really good. As always, this show is presented by First Resource Bank. It's a member FDIC bank in the Minneapolis area. It's run by Tim Siegley, Aaron Siegley, Charlie Anderson, and a bunch of great people who work at the, branch on Washington. Christy at the front desk is a Vikings fan. She may or may not be listening to this episode right now, but I can't thank those guys enough and girls, and always appreciate their support. Their platform for online banking is as easy to use as I've seen, and that's really what you're looking for. Just, it's sleek. It's easy. You press 3 buttons. You move money around. It's great stuff. If you've missed it, we got stuff at The Athletic. Tuesday wrote a story about J.J. McCarthy that, off seeing him throw and listening to his press conference in person, tried to put together just how he's approaching what Jonathan Grenard called a grand opportunity. And for Thursday, I gave a thought on all the UDFAs that the Vikings have signed thus far. We'll come back next week with more stories. Been having a lot of conversations on players that the Vikings picked and have had fun doing that. So please stay locked into The Athletic. If you're new here, we're almost at 3,000 subscribers on YouTube, which is just incredible. Haven't even been doing this 10 months. But hit that subscribe button right below. It really helps us out. It's helped grow the channel, more resources, more time, better episodes. That's kind of the plan. You can also hit the like button. That helps us out on YouTube, too. And if you're listening on Apple, Spotify, iHeart, Podbean, wherever the heck you listen to podcasts, rate, review, follow, and all that stuff. Not going to waste any more of your time. Let's jump right into the conversation with All City's Fran Duffy. Fran, welcome back to the Alec Lewis Show. Not a ton of returners of guests, so you hit the bar. Appreciate you spending your post-draft week with us. How you doing?
Alec, I appreciate you having me on again. That's quite an honor to be a return guest. It's we had such a great conversation earlier this offseason, so why not follow that up after the draft?
Exactly right. I know, you're like well into the UDFA film evaluations. We're going to get to some of that stuff because, as we talked about before we started recording, the Vikings have a huge class. They always pour a ton of resources in it, but I just wanted to go through pick by pick of what the Vikings did and kind of your thoughts and takeaways. Before we do that, though, I'm just curious for you, like, what was the most interesting aspect of this draft weekend to you? And it doesn't have to be like the most buzzy quarterback thing that, or maybe it is, maybe that was the most interesting, but just as someone who, this is the world you live in, like what stood out to you most, or what like were you just fixated on as the weekend played out?
Yeah, obviously everyone wanted to talk about the Shedeur Sanders fall, and just everything that circled around that. But aside from the quarterback conversation, I think for me, it was just watching to see. This was a weaker class. In a lot of ways, this class just was not as strong as other years we've seen. In the last handful of springs. But I think when you're looking at it, I was most interested to see, okay, how are teams going to approach this? Are there going to be 15 defensive tackles that go off the board in the first 3 rounds? Like, are we going to go nuts and say, these are the best players, we're going to select them? Or are teams going to say, hey, you know what? Like, we're going to wait a little bit because we know the depth of this class. It ended up being the former. They said, we're going to keep scooping these guys up. And by the time you got into day 3 of the draft, that position had largely been picked over. And it was the same thing with a couple of those other strong spots in this draft where teams were saying, you know what, I know that these aren't priority positions, but we're going to scoop these players up while the going gets, while the iron's hot here.
Yeah, it's a good segue, and we'll just start at the top. I mean, from the get-go, it felt like interior offensive line was the spot that the Vikings had kind of just eyed as a place that they could add a left guard with potential versatility to really just complete the overhaul of the interior and the offensive line in general this entire offseason. Then Tyler Booker goes off the board pretty early to the Dallas Cowboys. Gray Zabel, in the lead up to the draft, like the day before, you started to get the feeling that there was probably no way Gray Zabel was getting there at 24. And so it presented a very interesting situation for Minnesota. Derek Harmon goes off the board. If you liked him, he's now gone. Jahdae Barron, who, I'm sure you would agree is would have been a great fit for Brian Flores' system. He's off the board. So you're looking at 24. And the options were, trade back. Michigan's Will Johnson is falling, and he fits the zone type of eyes on the quarterback style that they play. And they ultimately snagged Donovan Jackson, sticking with the priority from the get-go of interior offensive line. And I watched maybe one game of film with him against Oregon and Derek Harmon, where he looks athletic, he looks like he picks up stunts. But just how did you feel about that pick at that spot with this specific player?
Yeah, I liked the pick. I think it made a lot of sense, certainly for Minnesota. You look at how that season ended for them last year, with just the inability to consistently control the line of scrimmage, really on both sides of the football. So it did not shock me whatsoever. I had Jackson as a starting grade, at guard. Some people viewed him as a tackle, even just based off the small sample size that we saw from him late last season. But I still viewed him best as a guard. And honestly, I kind of reflect back on a couple of times listening to Kwesi speak this offseason, whether it was the postseason press conference or out at the combine. And you try and weed through that stuff just to try and find where are the kernels of truth about where their mind is going into the rest of the offseason. And there was one part where Kwesi was said, you got to control the ball on offense. You've got to be able to get after the passer sometimes with just 4. These are things we all know. And it's like, all right, this feels like it's going to be a line of scrimmage offseason for the Minnesota Vikings. We know what they did at defensive tackle, certainly this spring leading up to the draft, but then to follow that up with what they did also along the offensive line. You bring in Kelly, you bring in Fries, but then you continue to follow that up. There was a question about, it was at the combine, and he was asked about just Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry. Was that going to change the running back market? And he gave this long answer, but then he snuck this little thing in at the end. He was like, that's a position that obviously, if you have the front to be able to block for them, they can change games and they can really impact not just your offense, but your defense, control the clock, and different things like that. And so he kind of circled it back to controlling the ball, offensive line, blocking for them. I said, yeah, they're definitely going to be investing in the line of scrimmage. So it was not surprising that they went this direction. And I think when you're looking at Donovan Jackson, you just feel good about his ability to step in right away and compete for a starting job.
Yeah, the morsel for me that I felt like kind of, put the bold italics on what they were probably going to do was at the owners' meetings. We're sitting with Kevin O'Connell, and Kevin O'Connell is asked about Blake Brandel, who was, played left guard last year. I'd say the first half of the season next to Christian Darrisaw, he really, the numbers were good. He wasn't like a glaring negative, maybe partially because the right guard was more of the glaring negative. But towards the back half of the season, when Christian Darrisaw tears his ACL, Cam Robinson comes in, it definitely, there were some dicey moments, especially into the playoffs. But Kevin O'Connell at the owners' meetings, he's asked about Blake Brandel, and Kevin says, if we were to start the season right now, Blake would probably be the guy. But you knew then that the draft was in the path of starting the season. So for me, it just felt pretty obvious. With Donovan Jackson, I've spoken to a lot of his coaches and people in his background over this last week, but it just sounds like I mean, he's not like going to be the most vocal guy probably in the world, even though I think he's progressed in that area. For him, I mean, he's very athletic. You mentioned kicking out the tackle, and that's also, and there's selflessness with that. But like, if there are concerns with him, where would those lie for you, just from the tape?
Yeah, I mean, I think there were some technique things that he can continue to improve on, but that's the case for most guys. I would say physically, like he passed all the physical checks that I would look for. I didn't know that he was going to be like a consistent year after year Pro Bowl talent. Like I thought that his power was just average. I thought the athleticism, the reported athletic scores with him coming into the year were crazy. I didn't quite think that showed up on tape. I saw like a solid athlete, but not like an otherworldly player. And that's why at the end of the day, when I take into account everything from a character standpoint, you take into account the film, I felt good about it. I don't know if he's going to be, Zach Martin, Quentin Nelson, like that level of guard. But if we're talking about like this guy's just going to be a really good starter, he's going to make a couple Pro Bowls over the course of his career, but maybe is never viewed as like a top 3 player at the position. That's still very valuable. We're seeing the guard market just explode, and so selecting that guy with a top 30 selection is not out of bounds in my opinion. So I think to me, when I'm projecting him forward, again, the biggest thing was all right, like, not a special physical specimen and still needs to clean up some technique things, but nothing crazy. And you feel good that he's going to be able to get there. That's why it made me feel safe about the evaluation and the projection.
Yeah, you mentioned Kwesi after the draft. He said something to me. It was pretty interesting. It's like, teams are moving their most athletic guys inside. Yeah. When you look at the money spent on these positions, he said this. These were his words. Like, you more are looking for like protector as opposed to like pigeonholing a certain position, which I thought was just an interesting comment. It's going to be interesting to watch over the course of time, just like how those markets at those positions go. To kind of segue, I mean, you talked about interior defensive line, and I'll ask you about Tai Felton in a little bit, but it was listening just from some of the behind the scenes stuff. Kind of throughout, the second round and into the third round. I believe the Vikings were supposed to be picking at 97, and had it been Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins there, it sounds like there would have been a lot of people internally that would have been totally okay with that. Ultimately, they trade back 5 spots and take Tai Felton. But I want to get to Tai Felton, but why not just go, from trench to trench? Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins, it feels like, is a very Brian Flores player where you just, that he's going to maximize this guy's versatility. I've got a lot of Georgia fans in my life, and a couple of them were like, I really wish he came back because it felt like there was more in the tank there. But just from, the fit perspective, from watching him on tape, like how interesting of a player is Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins to you?
I honestly agree with the assessment of him going back to school. I think that would have been really interesting, kind of projecting him forward. We're now in the time where all the too early 2026 mock drafts are starting to pop up. And my guess is that you would have gotten some love there with Ingram-Dawkins in some of those mock drafts as a guy that could ascend to that, the round 1 to maybe round 2 type of status. So if you're the Vikings, you're looking at this as a potential investment in a future talent. Now, he's 22 years old. He's a redshirt junior. It's not like he's the youngest guy in the world coming out of college football, but he is very inexperienced. I mean, he's played just over 900 snaps on defense, only 10 starts in his career. A large majority of that happened this past year. So he hasn't played a ton. The athleticism is apparent for a guy that's 276, just under 6'5". He's got pretty good length, and the movement just stands out right away. He's got really good initial quickness. He can get off the ball. He's laterally very, very smooth. The acceleration to kind of shoot gaps and make plays in the backfield. I would say, like, for a guy that typically what you see with a small sample size is the production on a per snap basis is very good, right? So, all right, small sample, the numbers should be there. His numbers weren't great for a guy that has not played a ton, but some of that is the nature of that system. How often with all these Georgia players, I know this living in Philadelphia, with all the Georgia Bulldogs that the Eagles have brought in, that typically the production has not always been there for those players, just the way that they utilize those defensive linemen in that scheme. But when I look at him, very very unrefined player, a lot of things that he's going to have to work through. But to take him in the 4th round to say, all right, we're going to get him into Brian Flores' scheme, and we're going to be very multiple with his usage, line him up off the edge, line him up inside, just let him be kind of that mismatch nightmare. That's as good a situation as you could hope for with Ingram-Dawkins moving into the NFL.
Yeah, to me, it just feels like a total bet on Brian Flores' ability to develop, defensive line coach Marcus Dixon, who's in his second year here, but had the position in Los Angeles with the Rams. It's like, okay, you guys have this ball of clay that is a very interesting one in terms of everything you just mentioned from a measurables movement perspective, and what can you do with them? And I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this, but like when you're taking a player in the fourth round, the hit rates typically look like 20% starter, 15% starter. So, I always find the conversation between do you kind of roll the dice on a guy who's a developmental player or like a highly productive guy whose ceiling is probably capped? Like that conversation to me is always interesting. And I feel like, I don't know, when you only have 4 or 5 picks and when the roster is as kind of veteran laden as this one is, like why not kind of roll the dice on the upside type of prospect?
Yeah, and I think look, teams look at day 3 of the draft in really one of two ways. Like you mentioned, you're either taking those high upside swings, guys with outstanding traits that have starting potential, but obviously, need refinement in certain areas. There's a reason why they fell to day 3. Or you're finding guys with extremely high floors where you feel really good about their ability to kind of just, plug and chug. You put this guy into your depth chart and you know what kind of role you're getting. He's going to be a third down back. He's going to be, your third safety. He's going to be, you just find these different roles for these players. And so, my guess with Ingram-Dawkins, there's honestly a little bit of both there, because if you worked him out and you met with him and you feel really good about his ability, like mentally, to say, all right, we know we can count on him right now to be a part of our sub rush package. Like, right now, 3rd and 8, we can get him out. He's going to be one of the 4 best defensive linemen in that kind of a situation. And he's got the tools to be able to develop into a potential 3-down player for us down the road. And so you might feel good about that. What I found to be interesting, coming into this draft, Kwesi's made 15 selections on day 3. He hasn't really selected, and you tell me from obviously you're going off of like how I evaluated some of these guys. I guess Levi Drake Rodriguez was a guy that was viewed as, oh man, like he wasn't necessarily like the super traits. He was like more like the production,
exactly
the
right.
way he played at Texas A&M Commerce, right? But all these guys, I'm looking through these names. You had outstanding size profiles with the Minnesota kid from a couple years ago. Yeah, Sezzy, you had some guys that had like outstanding size, but there weren't like outstanding speed prospects, outstanding athleticism prospects. So when you're looking at Ingram-Dawkins, he does buck the trend a little bit with what Kwesi and the Vikings have done under this tenure.
Yeah, that's interesting. And for me, and this is just conjecture on my part, but like I would have to imagine that's a very hard pushing for Brian Flores to be like, this is the guy that I prefer, regardless of kind of trends in the past. It's an interesting conversation. This receiver class as a whole, and talking to people throughout the league, it just felt like I remember kicking around with an AFC executive, like the Kyle Williams of the world, the Jalen Royals from Utah State, the Jalen Lane from Virginia Tech, and Tai Felton was in this group because Maryland's Tai Felton, who the Vikings obviously picked at 102, was a player that it just sounded like Keenan McCardell, the Vikings receivers coach, was in on from the beginning. Tai was at the combine on the field. Keenan was there watching the field. Tai at his pro day in Maryland. Keenan was on the field kind of putting those guys through drills there. And then he has the special teams ability that, one of the margins that this team has needed to improve in is on special teams. But like it kind of feels to me, just watching like some clips of him, is like long strider. The production is obviously there. He caught, I believe, close to 80 passes, if not more, like 1,100 yards or something last year. But how did you think about him by comparison to just a bunch of the receivers in this class, especially in that area of the draft?
Yeah, I honestly liked him a little bit more than some of the guys that went ahead of him. I think when you're looking at Tai Felton, this area of the draft is about where I felt most comfortable taking him. He reminded me a little bit of Jalen Tolbert, who went in I believe, the fourth round of the Cowboys a few years ago. Hasn't quite hit his ceiling, but I think it's a similar kind of bet. You're talking about a guy who's a little bit of a linear frame, really springy athlete. He's got some of that instant speed. We saw that at the combine, sub 4.4. He ran 4.37 out in Indianapolis, and that speed does show up on film. Whether it was in the screen game where you just saw instantly just transition into a runner and take off vertically down the field, but then he also has those deep ball chops to be able to track a ball over the shoulder and make defenses pay that way. He almost had 100 catches this year, but it felt like it was 80 catches in the first 6 weeks, and then defenses were like, yeah, well, we're not doing this anymore. We're doing everything we can to take him out of the game. But when you're looking at Felton, he's got he needs to get a little bit better as a route runner. That's where the coaching from Keenan McCardell is going to step in. You mentioned Keenan was at the pro day, was eyes on him at the workout. Keenan McCardell is really close with Maryland head coach Mike Locksley. They worked together years back, and I know that those two have stayed in touch. So I think when you're looking at that, if you get the stamp of approval from Mike Locksley, I feel like Keenan McCardell says, this is a guy that we can coach up to become part of. When you look at this receiving core, they've had some complementary pieces outside of Justin Jefferson. That'll give Tai Felton time to be able to grow into potentially being a 3-down player. And if not, this can be a situational deep threat and one of those game breakers that's going to work for us on the perimeter.
Yeah, you mentioned the production, and I remember going through some of the names, hearing that they probably would be interested in the middle rounds in a receiver, and I'm going through some of the names and just looking at some of the numbers and watching, and I remember getting to Tai Felton, who's mostly, shoehorned as the 4th round, 3rd round guy, and I'm like, really? This level of production at Maryland? I don't even know who the Maryland quarterback is. I don't really know much at all, anything about Maryland, but no, I mean, it's you said the perfect phrase or descriptor for kind of the guys that they've seemed to look for over since Keenan has kind of been as big of a voice in evaluation of this position here, springy athlete. That's when I think of Justin, it's just, it's always hard. He just moves different. Jordan Addison is very similar in that regard. Now, Jordan, as a comparison to Tai Felton, gets in and out of breaks probably as clean as you could ever imagine. And that, to your point, is probably the area at which Tai will need to progress. But, Jalen Naylor's in the final year of his rookie contract. Sure. And so it always made sense to me to add a guy who doesn't have the pressure of immediately having to be thrust in and tally the production that he did in college. It just made sense to me.
No question. And honestly, one of the other things too, we talk about high floor, high ceiling, and we talked about what the ceiling could be for Felton, but this is another guy too where he has the ability to be a core 4 guy on special teams, where he wasn't just a return man. He started 2 years on the kickoff coverage team. He started 1 year on the punt coverage team. And to me, that speaks to that football character, that selflessness as well. Some of the same things we said with Donovan Jackson earlier, that willingness to change positions late in your final season, potentially impact your draft status. I think when you're looking at Felton, there's an element of high floor there with that player that also would make him attractive. And I'm sure that made them feel safe taking him in the 3rd round.
The Vikings posted a video after the draft, and it was inside the draft room, and Keenan is dapping up Kevin O'Connell. You always need playmakers. So, you said it about the relationship with Mike Locksley, but it makes sense when you're picking a position or a player at that position, you lean heavily on the receivers coach. The last 2 picks, probably not the most sexy selections you'll ever find in an NFL draft in the 6th round, with Gavin Bartholomew of Pitt and Kobe King of Penn State. I'll say, and I've said this and written it, had Taj Brooks from Texas Tech not been picked at 193 by the Bengals, wouldn't have been shocking to me to see them do that at one of those 201 or 202. But Kobe King, my colleague, obviously Dane Brugler, it looked like he had him graded more as a 4th rounder, He's a bigger bodied guy, kind of I talked to one scout who's just a thumper of a player. But of those 2 guys, where does your mind go, if anywhere, in terms of the Gavin Bartholomew and Kobe King evaluations?
Yeah, honestly, they are like Kobe King is the Gavin Bartholomew of the linebacker class, and Gavin Bartholomew is the Kobe King of the tight end group. Both guys were team captains this year. I think that both guys kind of limited athletes. They're not someone that's going to be like athletic mismatch. Oh wow, like look at the way that they move sideline to sideline, but just good football players. I probably feel a little bit better about Bartholomew, moving forward into the NFL in terms of like, all right, if I had to guess like which one's got the most staying power. I would think that it's Bartholomew, just because when I'm looking at Kobe King, I talked about the athletic limitations. There were times too where his eyes just kind of betrayed him a little bit. Backfield actions could get the best of him. Too many false steps, and if you're going to be on the slower side, you need to be like aces mentally. And I just thought there were too many times where he was just like a step late to be able to react to some of that stuff. Whereas with Bartholomew, some of the athletic limitations were there, but I thought that he was a very willing blocker. He was pretty reliable at the catch point, didn't put a ton of balls on the ground. He could still get better as a route runner. That's sort of where some of those limitations come into play. But I just thought that he had like a nice high floor as, tight end 3, tight end 4 for an offense. Whereas Kobe King, I could see the floor being a little bit lower if he were not to hit.
The joke around here was, Johnny Munt was the tight end 3 the last few years. It was find someone who loves you as much as Kevin O'Connell loves Johnny Munt. And Johnny Munt spurned Kevin O'Connell and signed with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Will now be playing with Grant Yudinsky, who was the assistant quarterbacks coach here. But the Vikings have been in the market for T3, and Bartholomew seems to kind of align, listening to you and just reading everything, that he aligns as that potential player. What's going to be interesting, and this can segue us, but in the UDFA portion, they signed Ben Urasek from Georgia. Yep. Interesting player, transfer from Stanford. Bryson Nesbitt is another tight end I know you've done some work on or have at least followed a little bit. But that competition, again, the tight end 3 competition is not going to, my editors at The Athletic are probably not going to be overjoyed to read many paragraphs about the TE3 competition. But it will be fun for me as a nerd doing this to kind of just, assess these guys side by side. And I don't know how much work you've done on Urasek and Nesbitt, but I'd be curious how you think about those 3 guys kind of all together.
Yeah, they're a little bit different from a play style standpoint. Urasek is probably more your traditional, Y, like inline blocker. It needs to get a little bit bigger, like fill out that frame a little bit. But I think when you're looking at his overall skill set, starting at Stanford, then moving over to Georgia, the pass game production just hasn't been there with him. A lot of that's just been usage, but he obviously got passed over by Brock Bowers in that pass game for the first couple of years he was down there in Athens. And then this year still, he was only, he had 1.22 yards per route run this past year, which is a below average number. Just has not been viewed as like that pass game impact player at the position in that way. Was shocking that he didn't earn a combine invitation. And even too, he was going to come out last year after his 4th year in college. Got invited to the Senior Bowl, and typically when that happens, when the guys come back out the next year, all right, you kind of get that. You get that invite because you accepted the invitation the year before. We're going to extend it to you again. They didn't invite him this year, which I found to be shocking. I don't know if he's dealing injury, things like that, and it just wasn't announced. But usually they kind of go through the process, at least say, hey, he accepted the invite.
Right, publicly.
Yeah. You got to do it publicly, and then a couple weeks before we find out that he's not going to be there. But I think when you're looking at Urasek, you're trying to tap into some of the flashes we saw with him early on in his career. I do think he has a little bit more of a well-rounded skill set compared to Nesbitt, who Nesbitt. He was like he was getting a little bit of love, coming into the season. I know there was some early mock drafts that had him we're talking now for the last couple of years at North Carolina, keep an eye on this guy, under 240 pounds, but then he runs 4.88 at the combine. It's like, man, that's a tough sell, especially in this talented tight end class. And so that's why he ends up going undrafted. I wasn't particularly moved by him, watching him work out at the combine. Had a couple drops, looked a little tight at times going through routes. So didn't do like a full write-up on him for the site. But when you're looking at Nesbitt, probably more of the pass game weapon compared to Urasek more of the blocker. I would feel a little bit better about Urasek's ability to make the team as opposed to Nesbitt at this point.
Yeah. No, I think it's interesting analysis. It's fun to watch those guys. to mention that like a Nesbitt would have been projected or mocked. It's always kind of an interesting conversation. Of the other UDFAs, and you've taken a look at the list, I mean, like in talking to people within the league, you hear interesting kind of, people's eyes light up in some way about, Tyler Batty from BYU,
Yep.
Chaz Chambliss from Georgia, Silas Bolden, the returner from Texas. He's a guy who I've heard frequently from people around. And then a couple of interesting offensive linemen, Logan Brown from Kansas, like just a pedigree, was a 5-star recruit, top 10 recruit in the country coming out of high school. And then I believe Joe Huber, an offensive lineman from Wisconsin. But of those 5, like, or any of the others that you've eyed or watched, is there any that stands out to you of like, that's a very interesting one with the fit and just with what you saw on tape?
Yeah, I mean, just going through that list, I mean, Tyler Batty was a guy I didn't study him before going down to the Shrine Bowl, but just kind of seeing him up close, I'm like, all right, this is a kid that looks the part, big, sturdy, edge rusher, not a guy that you're going to be able to move around all that often, a little bit tight athletically, but he was always going 100 miles an hour. I loved just kind of watching him go through practice, and honestly, felt that way watching him at the combine as well. I thought he had one of the better positional workouts where the guy was it just looked like a pro. He's a little bit limited athletically. He's an older prospect as well. And so I think that's part of the reason why he falls out of the draft. It would not shock me if he kind of clawed his way onto the roster or, onto the practice squad. So he would be one name, certainly. Max Brosmer, I know that there were a lot of people that were really high on him and had draftable grades on him coming out of Minnesota. So the local kid there. Logan Brown, there was a lot of buzz about Logan Brown, and the ability that you mentioned, that you talk about the recruiting pedigree, that the tools are absolutely there. Hasn't really put it all together, and you wonder, like, all right, well, why hasn't he put it all together? But especially, look, offensive line, people are always looking for talented offensive linemen. So it is notable when a guy that was at the Senior Bowl, was at the Combine, has traits, doesn't get drafted. It's like, all right, there's typically like reasons for that. But that's certainly a player to watch. If the light comes on, that would be one to watch as someone that could make the roster as well. Chaz Chambliss, he was a guy who lit up the pro day, and afterwards, there were a lot of visits. A lot of teams wanted to get looks at Chaz Chambliss. So good on Minnesota being able to get him in, trying to win the battle for his services. We talked about the tight ends. Huber, there were like you mentioned Huber. He was another guy that there were a lot of people that had draftable grades on him. More of obviously a late round type of look, but I think that's a good signing for them as well. And I know there was one other name that we wanted to talk through as well.
Yeah, Bolden, but you want to segue to corner, which I want to real quick because the Minnesota people listen to this. Like Max Brosmer, did you watch him at all? And if so, I mean, I just wonder what you saw.
Yeah, not enough to do like a full write-up on him. Obviously I saw him up close for a few days down at the Shrine Bowl, and speaking with people that have been around him over the course of this pre-draft process, everyone was really, really high on him. He's the mobility, kind of like, he's undersized, but there's like a moxie to him that a lot of people kind of were attracted to. And he was, I thought he was one of the sharper quarterbacks down there. He actually, he won the all practice team from the coaches on the West Side for his week down there. I was a little shocked that he went undrafted just because we saw a lot of quarterbacks go. Ended up being, I think 13 quarterbacks got taken last week. So I expected that Brosmer was going to be one of those names. So the fact that he wasn't was a surprise to me.
The player we wanted to talk about, it sounds like he has an invite to minicamp. I have not been. I just say this for the podcast. Like I've not, spoken to anyone close to him to receive any confirmation that he'll be here or kind of what the, offer status is. But I loved your board because going into the draft on Die Hard because. Like you were just not afraid to, you have your evaluations and if it doesn't stack up with kind of what consensus is, I appreciate your willingness to just like believe in the evaluation. You did that with Omar Norman Lott, the defensive tackle from Tennessee, who the Chiefs, I believe, ended up taking in like the 3rd round. And they'll probably benefit from that. But the one guy at cornerback who is worth discussion here is Tommi Hill from Nebraska. You had him pretty high, and the comp that you had was funny because of how Brian Flores' history looks and players he's been around. But just, I guess, what did you like as much as you did with Tommi Hill, the cornerback from Nebraska? And I guess, how would you think about his fit in this specific system if he is indeed here in Minnesota in the weeks to come?
Yeah, I mean, he was a guy that I got onto just because of, there was a little bit of buzz coming into the season. I remember Bruce Feldman had him on his freak list, which we all know. He had him he was number 57 on the freak list coming into the year. And this is a guy who's got NFL size, right? 6'1.5", over 210 pounds, outstanding length for the position, just under 33-inch arms, 79.5-inch wingspans. So this is a good-looking corner who, coming into college, he goes to Arizona State as a wide receiver. He's catching passes from Jaden Daniels when he first gets there in Tempe. Now, they started kind of playing him both ways. So he played some receiver, played some DB, ends up going into the transfer portal, goes to Nebraska. When he first gets to Nebraska, they was like back and forth where he's ping-ponging in season. Where, hey, you're gonna be a receiver here this week, and then you're going back to corner next week. It wasn't until this year when he became a corner full-time. And, he's on the freak list. So early on in the season, as tape starts coming through, I'm like, all right, let me watch some of this Tommi Hill kid. I liked the profile. I was intrigued by the height, weight, speed. Alec, I loved the film. Immediately reminiscent of, to me, Trayvon Diggs, Xavier Howard. They're talking like big, competitive guys with ball skills, right? Like he's got the ability to attack the ball at the highest point. The wide receiver background shows up. But again, it wasn't just that. It was like the route instincts from depth, like playing in off coverage and jumping route breaks before a wide receiver even like dropped his pads, like tipped off where he was going to go. He immediately was able to kind of diagnose, all right, where is this throw going? Where's the quarterback going with the football? And that's what you like to be able to see from guys that had played offense before. They can get a little bit of a bead on like, all right, this is what receivers or what teams are going to try and do in the passing game against this coverage in this situation. And I thought that he showed that. He plays with outstanding confidence, which I think is a huge marker for success in the NFL. I mentioned the body type, but even like for a guy that size, like Bruce had him under 4.4. Like he's going to run sub 4.4. We ended up not getting a testing profile from him, unfortunately. So the film was awesome at the beginning of the season. And then he gets an injury, so you got plantar fasciitis, and so I don't know if you've ever dealt with that. That's a tough one. And so they sat him down for a couple weeks, and he's like he wants to get back on the field. Talking with people there in the program, it was like he wanted to get back on the field. All he wanted was to play football. So it's like, all right, they get him back out there on the field, and there was a game against. Yeah, it was against Illinois, and it was ugly, man. Like he got beat for a couple throws over the top. Receivers were running by him, and they said, we just have to sit you down. And they ended up shutting him down for the rest of the season. Now, I talked with Tommi at the Combine, and we were talking about the Senior Bowl, his decision to go down there. He accepts the Senior Bowl invite, goes down there, and he didn't look great in Mobile. And I said, well, where were you at, like health-wise? And he said, I was under 80%. I was like, did people tell you not to go? Like, because usually if guys aren't, if they've got like a hangnail, usually guys aren't making that trip. And he was like, no, like I hadn't played in 3 months, and I just wanted to go and play. I don't know, like to me, like I like that, right? So, and maybe it's just because I like the film, and I had spoken with people who was like, yeah, like he's just competitive. He loves football. There were some things away from the field, but it was like, all right, like this guy he just wants to play. So he goes, he tries to gut it out. It wasn't great. He ends up not working out at the Combine because because he still wasn't 100% when he got to Indianapolis. We didn't get a pro day workout from him. And there was like questions around that. Like, all right, why didn't we get any kind of workout from him at all? And then he ends up falling out of the draft. I know Dane had him, I think 5th, 6th round, I think was what he had listed in the B, something like that. I was really high on the film. And so he was very high on my board. For him to go undrafted, I immediately started texting people like late in the draft. I was like, what is going on here that he ends up going undrafted? But I think that if he kind of follows through and the Vikings are able to get him on the field and he's able to, he would be a guy I'd be looking at to try and make this team.
Yeah, it's I'll say this because it's very interesting. But I remember, I first signed up for your board. And because the Vikings cornerback spot has been kind of a question. It's an interesting position group for this team. And I remember going down some of your prospects and just thinking about how they stacked up in terms of other boards and seeing how high you ranked Tommi. And I remember watching, and I might have watched the week 2 game against Colorado.
Colorado,
Believe he had a pick. Yeah, he had a pick six in that game. Believe off Shador. And I remember texting someone on the Vikings staff about him after that. So this was spurred by seeing his name on your board, then going to watch the film. And I remember the comment then was like, he's got to land with the right people. Like that just has to be the case. So it's going to be very interesting if he's on the field and if he's here. I mean, we talked about this before we started recording, but Ivan Pace Jr. was a guy who, I mean, I remember talking to evaluators when the Vikings first signed Ivan Pace as a UDFA. Somewhere like, he was as high as a second round grade for me in terms of, yes, doesn't have the requisite size, but just the way he found the ball carrier was just different. And he's proven over the last few seasons, like why, the skill set was what it was. But it'll be interesting. I hope he's here just from a intrigue perspective. It'll be pretty fun. Just overall, and we'll wrap it up here. Like, what do you think of the Vikings class? I mean, I've seen certain people with post-draft grades, and they ask me to do grades, and I'm like, the second grade teacher that all the students like because they give the nice grades. But when you only enter with 4 picks and only one in the first 97 selections, I'm not sure what you can probably accomplish. They also, they used a 6th rounder to acquire Jordan Mason at running back. They traded back to acquire Sam Howell as a backup. Probably got to factor some of that stuff in. But just as you think about it holistically, how do you put a bow on it?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely colored through the lens of you only had a handful of picks, right? And so when you have that small of a sample, it's tough to feel like overjoyed. But I think with the limited resources that they had, I like what they did. I think Donovan Jackson, for all the reasons we stated, I think that was a fine selection there at the end of the first round. I like the pick of Tai Felton. You go through, like, Ingram-Dawkins was a little bit early for me, like based on how I valued him, yes, but because of the run on interior linemen and because of the traits, like, I understand the idea there, and I was fine with Kobe King's like valuation. I was fine with Gavin Bartholomew's valuation there. All right, like late day 3, like we're taking dart throws on high character individuals. To me, that's good process, makes a lot of sense. Would you like it if they had 10 picks as opposed to 5? Yes. But obviously that's out of your control, and you went out and you got a couple of vets on the pro market to be able to supplement that roster.
And a lot of it, too, will come down to how does J.J. McCarthy look? How does Dallas turn? I mean, the 2 players that they used a lot of the picks that they did not have to acquire last year. I mean, really, Dallas Turner's progression in year 2 or lack thereof warrants – the bullseye that it has on just the process. So it's going to be fun to kind of assess and watch. Fran, always appreciate you taking the time. Went much longer than I bargained for, but I owe you for the time, the analysis, and I'll keep you in the loop on Tommi Hill. It'll be interesting to follow if he is here. Thank you. Thanks for spending the time, man. Always appreciate it. Excuse me.
No, I appreciate having me. I'll be reading along for the Tommi Hill updates.
Thanks, Fran. Talk soon. And that'll do it for episode 80 of the Alec Lewis Show. Really appreciate Fran Duffy hopping on the show, talking through his evaluations of the Vikings 5 picks and the UDFAs. You heard the passion of Tommi Hill, the cornerback from Nebraska. We'll see what kind of confirmation I can get as far as him potentially being in Egan for minicamp, but one to watch for sure. And we will have coverage of it if he's here, if he's not, of all the other players who are going to be here over at the Athletic. So please stay locked into that. If you're not, follow me on social media at Alec_Lewis, where I tweet thoughts about, the Wolves and reviews and all that good stuff. Really great stuff. But yeah, appreciate you guys being here. The show is presented by First Resource Bank. Please hit the subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple, Spotify, rate, review, all of that good stuff. I'll be hosting with Paul Allen on KFAN 9 to noon on Friday. We'll be talking some Vikings. We'll be talking some Derby, Kentucky Derby. We'll be talking probably some Wolves, a lot of jokes, maybe some bad ones. I'll try to keep PA steered on the right ship, but that's not really possible. So tune in for that. And we'll be back later next week with multiple episodes. So keep locked in to the channels, to the show. Appreciate you guys listening. Never take it for granted. It's been very fun to build this thing. And yeah, episode 80. We'll talk to you guys very soon.